Being home alone is supposed to feel safe. A moment of solitude, peace, and relaxation. But for some people, it became their worst nightmare. Imagine sitting on your couch, watching TV, when suddenly you hear a sound upstairs. You know you're alone. Or at least, you thought you were. Some stories stay with you forever. Stories that make you double-check your locks, leave the lights on at night, and second-guess every creak and whisper in the dark. Tonight, we bring you 5 terrifying true home alone stories, accounts so disturbing, they'll make you question if you're ever truly alone. If you think you can handle it, let's begin. Story number 1, The Man in the Closet. It was a Friday night, just past 10 p.m. Emma, a 17-year-old high school student, was home alone for the weekend. Her parents had gone out of town for an anniversary trip, leaving her in charge of the house. She wasn't scared, she had stayed home alone before. The doors were locked, the windows shut, and her dog, Charlie, was curled up beside her on the couch. She was scrolling through her phone, half watching a horror movie, when she heard it, a soft creaking sound coming from upstairs. At first, she ignored it. Old houses make weird noises, she told herself. But then it happened again, louder this time. Emma sat up, suddenly aware of how quiet the house had become. Even Charlie, usually unbothered by anything, had lifted his head, his ears perked up. Then, a faint rustling noise. Like fabric brushing against wood. Her heart began to race. Maybe it was just the wind outside? Or a tree branch tapping against the window? She needed to be rational. Still, something about the noise felt wrong. It sounded like it was coming from her bedroom closet. She grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight. Slowly, she made her way up the stairs, her breathing shallow. The hallway felt colder than usual. Reaching her bedroom door, she hesitated. The noise had stopped. She placed her hand on the doorknob and twisted it slowly, pushing the door open. Everything looked normal, bed neatly made, clothes still on her chair, nothing out of place. Relieved, she let out a nervous laugh. "I'm so paranoid," she muttered. But as she turned to leave, she heard it again. A soft, deliberate exhale. From inside the closet. Emma's stomach dropped. She froze, gripping her phone tighter. Had she imagined it? Charlie let out a low growl, his fur standing on end. He was staring directly at the closet door. Emma's pulse pounded in her ears. She wasn't alone. With trembling hands, she reached for the closet door. The knob was ice cold. Taking a deep breath, she yanked it open in one swift motion. Nothing. Just her clothes, shoes, and an old stack of books. No one there. A wave of relief washed over her until she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Her clothes were pushed to the side. And in the small gap between them, at the very back of the closet, she saw it, a pair of wide, unblinking eyes staring right at her. A man. Hunched over, squeezed into the corner, his face partially hidden behind a hanging dress. For a moment, neither of them moved. Time stretched. Then, he lunged. Emma screamed and stumbled backward, nearly dropping her phone. The man bolted past her, shoving her aside as he sprinted down the hallway. She barely had time to react. Her instincts kicked in. She grabbed her bedroom door and slammed it shut, locking herself inside. Heart hammering, she fumbled to call 911. Through the door, she could hear heavy footsteps pounding down the stairs, followed by the front door slamming open. By the time the police arrived, the man was long gone. But what they found left Emma shaken to her core. Inside the closet, tucked in the very back, was a small makeshift bed, a few crumpled blankets, and an empty water bottle. He had been living there. Further investigation revealed that one of the basement windows had been forced open days prior. He had likely been inside the house before her parents even left. Emma never stayed home alone again. And every night since, before going to bed, she always checks her closet. Just in case. Story number 2, The Unknown Caller. It was a cold winter night, and Lena, a 19-year-old college student, was babysitting for the Miller family. The couple had gone out for a late dinner, leaving Lena in charge of their 2-year-old son, Jacob. The house was quiet, the kind of stillness that makes you feel hyper-aware of every sound. Jacob had been put to bed hours ago, and Lena sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 11 p.m. Just 2 more hours before the Millers returned. And then, the landline rang. Lena hesitated. The Millers hadn't mentioned expecting any calls. In fact, they barely used the landline at all. Curious, she picked up the phone. Silence. Not static. Not breathing. Just empty, hollow silence. She frowned. Hello? Nothing. Then, a soft click as the caller hung up. She shrugged it off. Maybe it was a wrong number. Maybe someone dialed by accident. She put the phone down and went back to scrolling. But then, the phone rang again. Lena hesitated, but picked up. This time, there was sound. A low, distorted voice whispered, "Check on the baby." Lena's stomach dropped. "Who is this?" she demanded, but the call cut off. Her heart began to race. Was this a prank? Someone messing with her? She rushed upstairs, pushing open the nursery door. Jacob was fine, sleeping peacefully in his crib. Still, unease crept up her spine. She double-checked the windows and locks, then returned downstairs, trying to calm herself. She picked up her phone to text Mrs. Miller, but the landline rang again. She jumped. With shaky hands, she answered. The same deep, raspy voice. "Why didn't you check under the crib?" A cold wave of terror washed over Lena. Someone was watching her. Heart pounding, she grabbed a knife from the kitchen and rushed back to the nursery. The room was silent, save for Jacob's soft breathing. Slowly, she kneeled down and lifted the crib skirt. Nothing. Just dust and a few stuffed animals. She exhaled, relief washing over her. Maybe this really was just a prank. But then, a new sound. A creaking noise, coming from the hallway. Lena spun around, clutching the knife. The hallway light flickered. And then she saw it. The closet door in the nursery was slightly open. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to move. Step by step, she approached the closet. The door was open just a crack, wide enough for someone to peek through. She reached out, gripping the handle. With a deep breath, she yanked it open. A man stood inside. Tall. Unkempt hair. Eyes wide with rage. He lunged. Lena screamed and threw herself backward, narrowly dodging his grasp. She slammed the closet door shut and bolted down the stairs, the sound of heavy footsteps pounding behind her. She ran into the kitchen, desperate. Her phone, where was her phone? The landline rang again. She hesitated. Then, a whisper from the other end. "I'm inside the house." Lena let out a sob, gripping the knife tighter. A loud bang. He was coming. But before he could reach her, red and blue lights flashed outside. A siren wailed. The man froze. Then, without hesitation, he turned and bolted for the back door. Lena didn't wait. She ran toward the front entrance and threw herself outside, just as 2 police officers rushed in. They searched the house, but the intruder was gone. However, what they found in the nursery closet sent chills down everyone's spine. Inside was a small mattress, a pile of empty food wrappers, and a knife. He had been living there. Hiding in the house for days, waiting for the right moment. The most terrifying part? The police traced the calls. They were coming from inside the house. The man had been calling her from a secondary phone line the Millers had forgotten even existed. Lena quit babysitting after that night. And to this day, she never answers unknown calls. Story number 3, The Basement Nightmare. Ethan, a 17-year-old high school student, was home alone for the weekend. His parents had left for a short vacation, trusting that he was responsible enough to handle himself. The house was old, built in the early 1900s. It had its quirks: creaky floors, drafty windows, and a basement that always felt too cold, no matter the season. Ethan had never liked the basement. The walls were lined with dusty shelves, the lighting was dim and flickering, and there was an old wooden door in the back that had always been locked. His dad said it led to an unused storage area, but Ethan had never actually seen inside. That night, it started with a power flicker. A brief moment of darkness, then the lights came back. Ethan sighed, assuming it was just the old wiring acting up. But then, he heard it. A low thumping noise. Coming from the basement. Ethan froze, his ears straining. Thump. 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 Slow. Rhythmic. As if someone was knocking from inside the basement. His stomach tightened. He checked his phone, no messages from his parents. No notifications about a storm that could be causing the flickering lights. Then, a louder bang. Like something had fallen over. A chill ran down his spine. Maybe it was just something shifting on a shelf? Maybe a rat? But then, the knocking turned into scratching. Long, slow, deliberate scratches against the basement door. Ethan grabbed a flashlight and a baseball bat, just in case. He took a deep breath and started down the stairs, each step creaking beneath his weight. The basement smelled of dust and dampness. The air was thick, as if it hadn't been disturbed in years. He shined his flashlight around. Nothing seemed out of place. But then, his light flickered. And in that brief second of darkness, he swore he saw a shadow shift in the far corner. He whipped his light back. Nothing. Just the old wooden door. And that's when he saw it. The lock on the door was undone. Ethan's heartbeat pounded in his ears. That door had always been locked. Had his dad left it open? Had someone been inside? He reached for the doorknob. And something knocked from the other side. He stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight. The knocking grew more frantic. Then, a whisper. "Let me out." The voice was hoarse. Weak. But somehow, familiar. Ethan's mind raced. Who was in there? Then, a sudden, violent bang against the door. Dust rained down from the wooden beams above. Ethan turned and ran up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut behind him. His breathing was ragged, his hands shaking as he locked it. Then, his phone buzzed. A text. From his dad. "Ethan, whatever you do, don't open the basement door." Ethan's skin crawled as he stared at the message. His dad had never mentioned anything like this before. His hands trembled as he typed back. "Why? What's going on?" 3 dots appeared. His dad was typing. Then, a loud creak from the basement. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He slowly turned his head toward the door. And then, the doorknob started to turn. Slowly. Back and forth. As if something on the other side was testing it. His phone buzzed again. A second text from his dad. "If the door is open, get out of the house. Now." Ethan didn't hesitate. He grabbed his keys, his phone, and sprinted out of the house, slamming the front door behind him. He didn't stop running until he reached the neighbor's yard. His heart hammered in his chest. His hands were clammy. From the safety of the neighbor's porch, he turned back toward his house. The basement window, the one at the side of the house, was open. A dark figure stood inside, just barely visible through the glass. Watching him. Then, it stepped back into the shadows. And disappeared. The police arrived 20 minutes later. They searched the house, but the basement was empty. The wooden door? Still locked. No signs of forced entry. No footprints. Nothing. But Ethan's dad confessed something when he got home. Years ago, when they first moved in, the previous owner had warned them never to open that door. The man claimed that something lived inside. Something that wasn't supposed to be let out. Ethan never stayed home alone again. And to this day, no one knows what was behind that door. Story number 4, The Shadow in the Window. Lisa, a 21-year-old college student, had just moved into her new apartment. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small, cozy place on the second floor of an older building. Affordable. Quiet. Perfect for studying. Or so she thought. Her apartment had a large window in the living room, facing the alley between her building and the next. It was a quiet street, not much traffic, and the alley was mostly used by the building's tenants to take out their trash. For the first few nights, everything seemed normal. But then, she started to notice something strange. Every night, just as she was getting ready for bed, she would get this uneasy feeling, like someone was watching her. At first, she brushed it off. "It's just in my head," she told herself. "Just nerves from being in a new place." But soon, she realized she wasn't imagining it. Because one night, she saw it. A shadow in her window. Lisa was sitting on her couch, scrolling through her phone, when a movement caught her eye. She turned toward the window. For a split second, she saw it, a dark figure standing just outside, staring in. Her heart skipped a beat. She jumped up, flicked on the lights, and ran to the window, but the alley was empty. No footsteps. No signs of anyone. Just the dim glow of the streetlight casting eerie shadows. She tried to laugh it off. Maybe it was just a trick of the light. But deep down, she knew she had seen someone. And it wasn't the last time. Over the next few nights, Lisa started to feel watched constantly. She kept her blinds closed, but every night, around the same time, she would hear soft tapping on the glass. Like fingernails. She started to avoid the living room at night, staying in her bedroom with the door shut. Then one night, her phone vibrated. A text message from an unknown number. "Why did you close the blinds? I liked watching you." Her blood ran cold. She froze, gripping her phone. She quickly replied, "Who is this?" No response. She checked the locks on her front door and windows, everything was secure. But when she peeked through the blinds, the shadow was standing there again. Closer this time. Lisa didn't sleep that night. She double-checked every door and window. Left the kitchen light on. But the next evening, something even more disturbing happened. As she was getting ready for bed, she heard it, not tapping this time, but scratching. Slow. Deliberate. Right outside the window. She held her breath. Then, a whisper. "I know you're awake." Lisa's heart pounded so hard she thought it would burst from her chest. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911. But as soon as the operator answered, the scratching stopped. She peeked through the blinds. The shadow was gone. The police arrived 15 minutes later. They searched the alley, nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints in the dirt. But Lisa knew what she saw. And she knew, whoever it was, they would be back. Determined to prove she wasn't losing her mind, Lisa set up a camera facing her window the next night. She kept the blinds slightly open, just enough for the camera to catch movement. Then she went to bed. Around 2:37 a.m., she woke up with a start. Something felt wrong. The air felt heavy, like someone was in the room with her. She held her breath, listening. Silence. Then, a soft creak. From inside her apartment. Lisa's stomach dropped. She reached for her phone with trembling hands, opened the camera app. And that's when she saw it. The footage from her window camera. At 2:34 a.m., just minutes earlier, a figure had appeared. Not outside. Inside. Standing just behind her couch. Watching her. Then, the screen glitched. The figure moved closer. The last frame before the feed cut out. The shadow was standing right outside her bedroom door. Lisa didn't think twice. She bolted from her bed, grabbed her phone, and ran straight for the front door. As she reached for the lock, she heard it. A whisper. Right behind her ear. "You can't run forever." She screamed and flung open the door, racing into the hallway. Her neighbors rushed out, seeing her in a panic. The police arrived within minutes. But when they entered her apartment, no one was there. No signs of forced entry. No unlocked doors. But the footage? It was real. The police were baffled, but one officer, an older man, pulled Lisa aside. His face was serious. "This isn't the first time this has happened in this building." Lisa's blood ran cold. The officer explained. Years ago, a man had lived in that very apartment. He was a recluse, barely seen by neighbors. But one day, he vanished without a trace. The landlord assumed he had just moved out, but something was off. Because tenants after him started seeing shadows. Figures in the windows. Scratching at night. Just like Lisa. The last woman who lived there? She left in the middle of the night. Never came back. Lisa didn't stay another night. She packed her things and moved out immediately. And as she left, she took one last look at the apartment window. For a second, she swore she saw it again. A dark silhouette standing there. Story number 5, The Locked Room. Ben was 18 years old when he moved into his uncle's old house for the summer. It was a Victorian-style home, huge and old-fashioned, with creaky wooden floors and dimly lit hallways. His uncle had recently inherited it, but didn't plan on living there. So, he let Ben stay there alone for a few months while he figured out what to do with the property. At first, Ben loved the independence. No rules. No curfew. A massive house all to himself. But there was one rule his uncle had given him before he left. Stay out of the room at the end of the hall. Ben had laughed at first. Why? Is it haunted? He joked. His uncle didn't smile. Just don't open that door. Ben nodded. But deep down, his curiosity had already started to grow. And soon, he would regret it. For the first few nights, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Ben settled in, spending his nights watching movies, playing video games, and enjoying his newfound freedom. But then, the noises started. At first, it was just faint knocking sounds coming from upstairs. He assumed it was the old pipes. Then, one night, he woke up to something different. A sound that made his stomach drop. A doorknob jiggling. Ben sat up in bed, listening. Then, tap, tap, tap. Soft, deliberate taps on the floor. Like bare feet walking. He held his breath. The sounds came from the hallway. From the locked room. The next morning, Ben checked the door at the end of the hall. It was locked, just like his uncle said. But now, there was something new. The faint outline of fingerprints on the doorknob. Like someone had been gripping it from the inside. Ben told himself it was just his imagination. But that night, the noises returned. Only this time, the knocking was louder. And then, a whisper. "Let me out." Ben froze. The voice was right outside his bedroom door. Ben barely slept. The next day, he decided he needed answers. He called his uncle. "What's in that room?" he asked, forcing himself to sound calm. There was a long silence on the other end. Then his uncle finally said, "I told you not to ask." Ben's heart pounded. His uncle sighed. That room belonged to the last owner. An old man. He never left. He died in there. And after that, well, things started happening. Ben swallowed. What kind of things? His uncle hesitated. People hear noises. See things. The door locks itself, but sometimes it opens. Ben's blood ran cold, because at that moment, he heard a creak from the hallway. Slowly, he turned his head and saw it. The door at the end of the hall was open. Ben hung up immediately. He stared at the door, heart racing. He knew he should run, leave the house. But something pulled him forward. Step by step, he moved closer. The room inside was dark, the air stale and cold. He reached for the light switch. Nothing. Then, his phone screen illuminated the space. What he saw made him gasp. The room was empty, except for a single wooden chair facing the wall. And then he noticed something else. Deep scratch marks on the inside of the door, like someone had tried to claw their way out. Ben stepped back, his breathing shaky. Then, he heard it. A slow inhale from the chair. Ben froze. The darkness shifted. Something was sitting there, watching him. Then, it stood up. Ben didn't wait to see more. He ran. Through the hall, down the stairs, straight out of the house. But just as he reached his car, he glanced back. And there it was. A figure standing in the upstairs window. Watching. Waiting. Ben never went back. His uncle sold the house soon after. But sometimes, at night, Ben still dreams of the locked room. And in those dreams, the door is always open. As we reach the end of these 5 disturbing true home alone stories, one thing becomes clear: being alone isn't always what it seems. The idea of solitude can feel safe, peaceful, even comforting. But in the wrong circumstances, it can also become a living nightmare. A shadow where there shouldn't be one. A whisper in an empty room. A locked door that won't stay closed. These stories remind us that the scariest horrors aren't just in our imagination. Sometimes they're real. And sometimes they're already inside the house. Tonight, when you lock your doors and turn off the lights, ask yourself this. Do you truly know what's inside your home? Maybe you've heard the faint sound of footsteps upstairs. Maybe you've caught a glimpse of movement in the corner of your eye. Maybe, just maybe, you felt a presence watching you. If so, you might want to check again. Because as these stories have shown, you were never really alone. If you liked this video and found it useful, please like it, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel.